It's time for RealAg Radio on Rural Radio Channel 147 on Sirius XM. RealAg Radio and RealAgriculture.com is your home for insight and analysis of the issues that are impacting your farm business. Let's get real and get connected with RealAg Radio. Welcome to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM. Shaun Haney, your host here on this Friday edition of the show. Thanks so much, everybody, for making RealAg Radio and Rural Radio 147 a big part of your workday. It's great to be back. Here we are. You got tired of all the replays on Rural Radio 147 through the holiday season. We are back with a fresh show, the first one of 2025. It is hard to believe that it's 2025. But here we are, and just want to say, I hope everybody had a great Christmas season. You got to spend time with friends and family, of course, and got a chance to relax a little bit. Maybe you did a vacation, maybe you did a staycation, whatever you did, a bit of a chance to recharge, refresh, and take on 2025 just flying. So I hope everybody had a great time, and Happy New Year to everybody. That's right. It's here. Like I said, 2025. Okay. And here's what I also got to say. You take a few days off and, from a recharge perspective, and you kind of get to reflect and you realize how much you love doing this. So all I can say is thank you to everybody so much for being a part of the audience. This show continues to grow. We got a lot of big plans for not only RealAg Radio, this show, but also a lot of the things that we do at Real Agriculture, right? We got a lot of different podcasts, some video series, continue to provide insight and information on the website, our YouTube channel, podcast distribution, and you're a big part of it. So thank you so much for being a part of the Real Agriculture audience, no matter where you are consuming it. YouTube, podcast, realagriculture.com, or on Rural Radio 147 for that matter as well. And it's great to be a part of the Rural Radio family indeed. Well, let's get to it. We have got a great show for you here today. We're going to kind of take a bit of a look at, 2025, what is in store? Positive, the negative. What does it mean for agriculture? What is in store for us in the year ahead? We're going to start off by doing that with Anne Wasko, the Gateway Livestock Exchange, for a beef market update. Get her perspectives. And then we're going to bring in the RealAg Issues Panel. We've got Kelvin's not here. We've got Lyndsey Smith from Real Agriculture. And we also have Tyler McCann, who's the managing director at CAPI. We'll also talk about the fact that we may not have a prime minister by the end of the day. That's also a rumor circulating. But we'll cover a whole bunch of things from sort of a prediction and forecast and a look ahead for the next 12 months. If you have any feedback, you can send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. Big shout out to the Cropping Systems Conference. It's going to be happening on Tuesday. I'm going to be there in Kennewick, Washington. Looking forward to speaking about all the different issues that are impacting agriculture, and looking forward to talking to a lot of no-tillers, direct seeders in the PNW region. So looking forward to that. Okay, let's take a break. When we come back, we got Anne Wasko, the Gateway Livestock Exchange, right after this. This is Shaun Haney, host of RealAg Radio. To all our incredible Real Agriculture listeners, I want to take a moment to say thank you for your support and engagement over the past year. Agriculture is a tough business, and we're proud to be a part of the conversation that matters to you and your farm. From all of us at Real Agriculture, Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays. May this season bring you some well-deserved time with family and a chance to recharge for what's ahead in 2025. Here's to another great year in agriculture together.
What's next doesn't happen by accident and doesn't happen by chance.
What's next happens when experience meets expertise, when data meets dollars, and when steel meets earth.
What's next happens when the promising work of Pioneer's state-of-the-art research centers meets the unsparing challenges of more than 17,000 on-farm trials.
Our ultimate goal is to bring the next seed breakthrough to your field.
Because Pioneer isn't just our name.
It's our mission. Pioneer.
What's next
happens here.
I'm Lyndsey Smith from RealAgriculture.com. Join me Monday nights for The Agronomists, a 1-hour live and interactive show broadcast across YouTube, Facebook, and X. Monday nights at 8 p.m. Eastern, I host expert agronomists from all over the country to give you answers to some of the toughest agronomic questions. Join us live or catch the replay Tuesday morning. That's The Agronomist with me, Lyndsey Smith, Monday nights live at 8 p.m. Eastern.
Let's talk about what's going on in these beef markets. It's time for another edition of the Beef Market Update with Anne Wasko, the Gateway Livestock Exchange. And Happy New Year. It is great to chat with you.
Yes, happy 2025. I got to get used to writing it and saying it.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
25.
Yeah.
I still remember like Y2K, like it was... the world was ending. Look, we made it, Anne. We made it.
We made
Quarter
it.
century. Okay, we're off to a pretty hopping start when it comes to prices here on January 3rd, 2025. What happened this week?
Yeah, the year is fresh, but wow, what a great start. Sometimes we start the new year and things are very quiet, not much happens. But in the U.S. and the southern markets, Texas and Kansas, we jumped $3 to $4 from last week. So $1.95 to $1.96, their live trade here yesterday. In the north, those Nebraska feeding regions, $3 higher dressed. So $3.10 delivered U.S. So, just a smoking market to start the year. The choice cutout kind of driving some of that in terms of it was up $2 this week, 323.5. And just what the reasoning behind that would be packer margins negative. So they cut their kills, push the cutout, and, kind of all these things roll together. So that's kind of driving it, which is great. Locally in Alberta, strong as well. So some dress cattle this week at $4.30 delivered. That's $10 higher than last week. Alberta. So a light trade, but still great, solid tune to start 25 with.
Yeah, you almost did it again there.
I know.
25. Yeah, it always takes some getting used to every single year. We do the same thing from 23 to 24. Okay, so let's look ahead here. 2025, like you said, we're off to a pretty good start price-wise. We want to kind of provide a bit of an outlook here on the year ahead, what to watch out for, maybe some predictions, some thoughts. Where do you want to start?
Well, I think I have to start on the supply side because that's the piece I feel most comfortable and confident about in terms of what lies ahead. It's only a piece of it, obviously, but the supply side still really points to very friendly in terms of that North American beef supply. We're going to have a smaller cow herd recorded for January 125. We'll get that report from USDA later this month. The Canadian report from StatsCan will be in February, but they'll both say cow numbers smaller to start 25. So that means a smaller calf crop coming and ultimately smaller beef production. How much smaller is still going to depend a lot on that whole heifer retention piece, and we'll see how that plays out. So that's kind of on the watch list. It'll be smaller. How much smaller? We'll watch as we go through the cattle on feed reports each month. So there's things we can watch about, and that's why we have a talk every 2 weeks, Shaun, to things we can watch and kind of keep our eyes out. At this point in time, the projection for 2025 U.S. beef production is down 2%, and U.S. cattle slaughter, that's fed and non-fed, to be down 3%. So that's kind of how we're going to start the year. Canadian numbers will obviously be down as well. The second thing, after we talk about supply, in terms of what happens to prices, is demand, obviously. And we talked so much about demand in 24, but it was a good news story. Sometimes we talk about demand with struggles, but that wasn't the case in 24. So now we come into 25, retail prices, wholesale prices are record high. And does that continue? I'd say yes in 25. Now the question is how do we move this beef forward as we're going? And I think demand, if my projection for 25 is could we hold what we had last year together, I think that's a win. So stable demand, but lots on the question marks there in terms of inflation, how consumers are feeling about their incomes, competitive meats, all those pieces play into really where beef demand ends up being. But so demand's going to be something, and I always want to remind listeners that demand, we talk about it in one bucket, but really it's about three buckets. We've got retail demand, we've got food service or restaurant demand, and of course we've got trade. And for us as Canadians, of course, trade and for Canadian beef production, close to half of our market. So whereas in the US, it's closer to 11%. So the two countries look at trade differently, and that impacts our demand differently in the two countries. But it's so all those three pieces are going to be parts to watch as we go through 25.
Well, after the last couple of years and some of the concerns about the economy, and then you look at how strong beef demand has been given the prices that are out there in the restaurant trade or for in the grocery store, I would be very cautious to make any sort of you go back a couple of years, we've had lots of chats, but I don't know about demand this year. I don't know. I'm not sure about this. And the consumer has just pushed through. It's kind of amazing. It's an amazing story.
It is an amazing story. Now, I think producers and our industry have done an exceptional job of, we've got this product that has got so much versatility in terms of the different cuts, the different pieces, the different price points. And I think we've really played that to our benefit. And quality, obviously, at the top of that. Consumers today are looking for quality. So that's a win.
Okay, but Trump tariffs. That has to be a factor, doesn't it?
It has to. That was going to be on my list. I was leaving it till later, but okay, we'll put it in now. We don't know. Yeah, Shaun, all of this, we don't know how it plays out in terms of that unknown, in terms of that tariff threat. How, what, when, on, what, where, all those things. So we don't know how that plays out, but for sure it has an impact. We know from a Canadian perspective how important U.S. trade is to Canada. That's a no-brainer. So that one, it's there, Shaun, but I can't make a prediction on that one.
But it's it's definitely their headlights are shining bright on that one.
The headlights are shining bright. And then play the piece into the exchange rate piece in terms of our Canadian dollar, 69.5 last night. And then the question is, tariffs, a stronger dollar in the U.S., does that impact U.S. exports of beef? Though there's so many different sides of this in terms of what that might lead to.
Well, take that dollar. We're down to what, 69, low 69s at this point on the Canadian exchange to U.S. dollars, and we're a net cattle feeder importer. That's that they get more. Sure, we reap the rewards of a low dollar when we're exporting live cattle. But
or beef, yeah. But on beef. Exactly. Yeah. And that goes back to that supply piece. The Canadian herd is so small that Canadian feedlots are really having to import U.S. feeder cattle to keep pens full. That's the supply side.
Anything else on your list?
One, I have to talk weather. You got to throw weather in. It's always on the list. If we get, like last year, the right amounts of moisture at the right times in the right places, those are all certainly positives. But we know there's a large part of the U.S. and Canada that are still, very much on the dry bias side. And really what plays out in 2025 plays a part in heifer retention decisions, what the ultimate feed grain prices look like. That's our main feeder price input for our feeder cattle. So weather always is on the list. And it really needs to still be there in terms of we came with some good moisture early last year, but it's been a dry second half of the year for most of us.
Yeah. And for those of you watching on YouTube, you can see there's whiteness behind me. It's cold in Western Canada, and there is snow on the ground, but it's not the kind of snow that really makes that dramatic difference when it comes to moisture, when it comes to grass conditions. We got to wait for that a little bit in the spring.
Yeah.
Or for that to come true. Weather is always the biggest if, though. Like you said, if, and I think you did a good job with that in terms of it's in capital letters.
It's in capital letters. So I guess right now the big ifs are, I got to put tariffs first from a Canadian cattle industry perspective. The question marks there for 25. And then I would put weather second. But the supply and demand side, I feel good about.
Awesome. Well, Anne, a happy new year to you. Looking forward to our chats every 2 weeks here for the beef market update. Stay warm out there, okay?
Okay, you too, Shaun. Thank you.
Okay, we'll be right back on RealAg Radio. We got the RealAg Issues Panel. Tyler McCann of CAPI and Lyndsey Smith of RealAgriculture standing by. We are going to continue with our thoughts on what can we expect from 2025 in agriculture right after this. If you're serious about agriculture, RealAg's got you covered.
For over 10 years, we've listened to and shared what producers have to say about everything from policy to agronomy from coast to coast.
Keep up with the latest in Canadian agriculture at RealAgriculture.com through daily newsletters and check out our YouTube channel.
Thanks for joining us in the RealAg community as we continue to cover and serve North American agriculture.
Before you get back in the field this year, spend some time with the Corn School on RealAgriculture.com. Get all the information you need on hybrid selection, planting depth, crop inputs, and more from a wide range of industry experts. A massive library of video content is available on demand when you need it most. Spend your time outside of the field, inside the classroom, with the Corn School on RealAgriculture.com.
Get all the information you need to keep your pulse crop healthy and profitable with the Pulse School on RealAgriculture.com. The Pulse School is a free YouTube video series covering agronomy, research, and more across a host of different pulse crops. It's also available as an audio podcast wherever you download or stream your favorite podcast. Check us out on YouTube or visit RealAgriculture.com. The Pulse School, brought to you by BSF Canada. Let's get going with the RealAg Issues Panel here on this first Friday of January. Let's bring in the panel. Up first, Lyndsey Smith, coming out of Ottawa, Ontario. The location where Team Canada epically disappointed last night, losing to Czechia for the second year in a row. Lyndsey, I blame Ottawa.
You may not. So go ahead, but no, I think, I watched the game last night. I'll have everybody know the Canadian Tire Centre is maybe 20 minutes from my house. I could pretty much smell the disappointment outside. Anyway, we watched a lot of the World Juniors tournament here in my house. We had sickness come to my house, so basically that's all we did. And I have some thoughts about the Canadian team. I'm not blaming the city. I'll tell you that much. So there you go.
Well, you can blame discipline, lack of offensive creativity. Those come to mind, and we kind of figured it out way too late. We got to about midway through the second period, and we started playing differently. So,
Anyway, it's disappointing for the players for sure, and for everybody who has come out to watch. But I'll just note nobody invited me to a game, so not bitter. Just pointing that out. Anyway,
how did that happen?
I don't know.
Exactly.
So anyway. Yeah.
Also joining us here today, by the way, we have no Kelvin Hepner. He is out with the family. He is, right about now, Lyndsey, where is he? He's somewhere in North Dakota, and he's
he's at Sean's favorite store. I think they were at Shields. They were at a PWHL game last night, so that was really cool. Took the girls there. And on his way home. So well-deserved family vacay.
I told him to take a picture from the Ferris wheel, but I have not seen it as of yet.
Give him time.
He needs to pick himself up like a smoker, and if it's not Shields, you just don't need it.
You don't need it. That's right.
Also joining us is Tyler McCann he's managing director at CAPI, frequent guest here on the RealAg Issues Panel. Tyler, Happy New Year to you.
Happy New Year to you as well, Sean. And it's great for Philip to talk about how RealAg is such a Western focus. Eastern Canada is holding down very strong on the panel today. Mm-hmm. Got the majority of the seats. And Lyndsey and I look forward to bringing the best of all that Eastern Canada has to offer. I will just say, going back to your comments about the disappointment around a lack of discipline and a lack of offensive creativity, I think that may apply to the country as a whole these days, and the bad news that are going to come to us in 2025, not just our junior hockey team.
Yeah. So that's interesting. I like that comparison. Lyndsey knows I love those kinds of. Anytime we can work sport into what we're talking about here,
that's right.
It leads to just a great show. So, Tyler, we'll start with you then. What do you mean by that? Sometimes I hear from the audience, you're too harsh on Canada, right? We got a lot of good things going. So what do you mean by what you just said?
So first, I often don't think that we're harsh enough on Canada, Sean. I don't want to start the show on the year on a sour note, but But we do have a lot of good things going for us, and yet we often miss the mark and don't make the most of them, and we have no sense of kind of the opportunity cost of kind of an approach that doesn't fire on all cylinders. And so, 2025 is going to be quite a year for Canada. Clearly, the potential for tariffs coming in the month of January is pretty significant. And yet I see no discipline amongst the government of Canada, amongst governments in Canada when we involve the provinces around what's our plan, what's our strategy. Never mind what's our strategy with the United States, but what's our strategy if this does happen? Are we just going to let businesses flail around? Will there be any kind of support, any kind of measures there? So I see no discipline on governments as we approach this issue. I see no creativity in how we better position Canada for success in it. And again, I'm afraid that this will be very true for the potential for tariffs. And up until the time of an election, we'll speak to kind of the where the government of Canada is on every issue.
Lyndsey, do you think that we fall into this comfort zone, this narrative, this assumption that no matter what happens from a U.S. policy perspective, they're going to treat us a little bit differently than everybody else? Are we too comfortable in that?
Shaun, we are unique and beautiful butterflies, and we are the U.S.'s favorite person. Just kidding. I'm being completely facetious because, yes, I think that we, as a nation, overall, what was it? I actually distinctly remember there being a column about us being meh about a lot of things. It carries over, right? It carries over to this as well. I think that Canada as a whole, and Tyler's right, from our government sort of on down, I think that there are definitely people within, let's say our provincial governments or within some of our political parties that are saying, hey, look, guys, we need to take this seriously and we need to be approaching this, impending tariffs, increasing protectionism, trade, a falling dollar, all of these things are productivity, everybody's favorite word. But I think that we have largely still set back and said, oh, but Canada will be treated differently. There's this expectation that because we are the apartment over the U.S., that somehow, and yes, sure, we can look back in the past and we can find examples of that. Absolutely. And we certainly have integrated supply chains that, I know, Shaun, it's a bad word, but we have, people, processes, we have entire supply chains, north and south, that work incredibly well together. But politically and policy-wise, we really should not be sitting here thinking we're going to be treated special or different or better than anybody else, because realistically, I don't think that holds water any longer. And the longer it takes us to put a plan together, the worse off we're going to be.
Yeah. Well, I look at today's announcement. The Biden administration has rejected the Nippon Steel deal for national security reasons, right? That's Japan. That's different than China. That's different than Iran. That's different than North Korea. It's Japan. Japan's as Canadian-like as it comes, but it's foreign capital.
Yeah.
I think it should be a bit of a shot across the bow for Canadians to see the mood's changed here a little bit, Tyler.
Yeah, and it's certainly, I think we had this idea for a while that we would friendshore everything, that it would be kind of the democracies versus the autocracies, or the East versus the West, or however you want to say it. But it's not that, right? It's America first. And it's not North America first. We have these cute gimmicks. We like, again, to Lyndsey's point, we like to, I think, convince ourselves that we're a little bit different. But it's not. It's North American. It's America first. And it's hard for me to understand how you get into this idea that Japanese investment in a U.S. business like that is a bad idea. My understanding of the reasons that they've given are, lots of opportunity to be taken to court and for the U.S. government to lose the case. But we're seeing that under Biden. We're likely to see more of it under Trump. And again, I just don't get the sense so what does Canada do? I have ideas, but I wish the Canadian government had some too.
They're busy, Tyler.
Busy.
Really busy.
They're so busy.
They're so busy right now.
So busy.
Yeah. Are we going to talk about that? Do we still have a prime minister today? I don't know.
Well, at the time of recording this show, we still have a Prime Minister, Trudeau.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
There is rumors abound and circulating this morning. People speculating that as early as this afternoon, he may decide to resign. I've read another report where they're saying Monday. I don't think anybody really knows. It seems the inevitable is going to happen, though, doesn't it, Lyndsey? Or could he surprise me?
Well, of course he can, because I think realistically people have called the demise of Trudeau's leadership several times over, and every time he turns around and says, no, I'm staying. The issue for me, I think, here is that while we are having this, I think, important conversation about what our plan is, these sorts of things, and while everyone can point to and say it is time that Trudeau must go and all those sorts of things, what happens after that is still a mess. We are still a long way from getting to an actual election or new leader or et cetera, and Parliament actually getting back to business. And there is a whole bunch of business to be done. Yeah. So as much as, Trudeau potentially handing in his resignation, then we're going to have a leadership race, et cetera. Yes, it is a step towards some stability, to some, to getting to where we want to be. It's still going to be a slog yet. It is not an immediate change to anything.
Leadership race 4 months. Like, if you wanted, right? Or is not 4 months?
Not necessarily. So this is where you get into this kind of choose your adventure around what's available. And
those
what's
are great books.
Those are the best books.
Such good books.
So
we need more choose your own adventure books.
Yeah, and whenever you're a 12-year-old reading them, it's really fun. Whenever you're a Canadian trying to decide the future of the country, less cool,
less fun,
buzzkill.
But yes, like the Liberal Party Constitution says 4 months, but it also says the national executive can do something else if need be. You've got this huge question around if the Prime Minister goes and asks for the Governor General to prorogue Parliament for the sake of a Liberal leadership race, when it is very clear that the Prime Minister has lost the confidence of the House. What happens and what does she do? And I think, this is not a good position to put the country in. This is the honorable thing to do would be for the Prime Minister to leave and resign. But if not, like there is an argument to be made that he should go face the House, lose that vote of confidence, go to an election. Yeah. And if the Liberals want to replace him, then they do that, but they do that right away through however they decide to do it. Mm-hmm. But get to an election sooner rather than later.
But before we take a break, can either of you think of an example of such a relatively rapid fall in popularity, approval? We had John Ibbotson, writer for the Globe and Mail, on the show right before Christmas. And it was one of the things that we kind of got into it a little bit, but this just feels like somebody that was like Teflon and couldn't be beat, and like Canadians would always back him. That changed fast.
But Shaun, it hasn't changed fast. It's been 2 years that the Liberal Party has basically been 10, 15, 20 points behind in the polls.
Yeah,
it has.
But that switch in that summer, that was a fast switch.
I feel like it was like fast and not fast. So I hear your point though, Shaun, and if anyone hasn't listened to the Ibbotson interview, go do it. It's really good. But one of the interesting things to me, I think, because I was over the holidays, had a couple of conversations with people, over text, whatever. And there was this discussion about like all the things that happened in those first sort of 4 or 5 years of exactly that, like scandals and all these sorts of things. And I was like, oh yeah, like I had to be kind of reminded that was that long ago kind of thing. So it feels like it is both sudden and immediate, but also a long time coming, right? So I think you could almost argue both as far as the fall from grace.
Okay, I'll put you on the spot here before we got to take a break.
Okay.
But
yeah, we do.
What will his legacy be? And you know what? Maybe I'll let you think about that during the commercial break. If he steps down, what will his legacy be? We'll take a break. You're listening to RealAg Radio, Real Radio 147. Here's what Wheat Pete's word on RealAgriculture.com is all about in under 30 seconds.
It's wheat time. I love wheat time. I love wheat. Get that sulfur on. Get that seeding rate right. Get that nitrogen on your wheat right. Get that protein. Know your variety. Know when you need to put fungicides on. Pick your product. Pick your rate. Do the right job. Get this wheat crop right. Have a nice day. Grow amazing wheat.
Infuse some energy into your next corporate event, customer meeting, or conference with RealAg Radio, Canada's national agriculture radio show. Create a unique experience at your next event with host Shaun Haney, broadcasting RealAg Radio live on Sirius XM, featuring exciting guests, captivating interviews, and the latest news from the agriculture community. Contact advertising at realagriculture.com or call 587-787-1795 to book your on location with RealAg Radio today.
Whew, we still got so much to get to. Appreciate everybody joining us here on this Friday, the RealAg Issues. It's great to be back behind the microphone. You know what? You don't realize how much you love doing this until you got to walk away from it for 10 days. Because Lyndsey said I had to take time off. She said it.
Yes, it was me. It was 100% me.
It's all your fault. Anyway,
it
was a great holiday season, and hope everybody had a great Christmas time, and you're into the new year with lots of jump in your step. Hey, farmers, trust is everything. Genesis Fertilizers is making real progress toward providing reliable, locally produced fertilizer. Join the ownership group and protect your bottom line. Learn more at genesisfertilizers.com/credibility and a crop production show. I'm going to be hosting a panel at a Genesis event, so please check that out and attend if you're going to be in Saskatoon. It should be bitterly cold and great to be inside. So there is that. You can find out more by going to genesisfertilizers.com/credibility. Okay, so panel. I asked you before we went to the break, gave you some time to think about it and ponder it. Whether it happens today, it happens Monday, or whenever this transpires, what will the legacy of Prime Minister Justin Trudeau be? Lyndsey, you first.
Oh, goodness. Okay, so thank you for giving us a bit of time, but all that did was I wrote a very long list, and now I have to be succinct. I will say, I think for many, the first thing that will come to mind will be deficit, will be money spending like drunken sailors, throwing money at all problems. I also think, personally anyway, I think what I have struggled with perhaps the most is this idea of this big smile, this big, we're doing everything for the good of fill in the blank, and yet this complete lack of either understanding or willingness to accept reality of how it all comes out. And I don't know if somebody can put that into fewer words, great. I'll think on it. But when I think of so many things this government has done, and Justin Trudeau in particular, whether it's, the environmental bent, whether it's support of families, whatever, how he has treated his people, thinking about how he treated Chrystia Freeland, it's this idea that somehow, no matter what he does, it's the right move when everyone is telling him this is the wrong move. And then he just grins about it and says he did great. It's just this complete disconnect from the reality of the situation. And to me, that will be what I remember going through many of these iterations of the Trudeau government making decisions.
What I wrote down was legal cannabis. Tyler, what did you say?
I think it depends on what Pierre Poilievre lets it be. So when Brian Mulroney passed away earlier this year, there was a lot of discussion about his legacy, about the GST, about NAFTA, and those things got to be a legacy because they were left in place by the government that replaced him. And I think if you look at some of the things today that people would say are crowning achievements from Trudeau, like the carbon tax or other things that people celebrate, those are going to be undone by Poilievre. I mean, the carbon tax will go, one of the first things that are there. And so I think so much of the things that Trudeau might want to be his legacy, Poilievre won't let be his legacy. And policies that have been enacted, maybe cannabis stays, the legalization stays. But I think the interesting question is how much else gets undone. And my hunch is that probably we'll end up remembering a government that didn't actually accomplish much and spent 10 years and a lot of money, navigated through COVID, dealt with the first Trump presidency, legalized cannabis, but at the end of the day, didn't do much that had any staying power. I would add to that, sitting in Quebec, oversaw potentially the resurgence of Quebec separatism, increased division across the country. And those are things that I do hope that Poilievre, as Prime Minister, can undo. And it will be interesting to see how he does it.
So I would second the division.
Yeah.
Comment.
And legacies can change. Like you mentioned Mulroney.
Sure. Yeah.
You think about this week, the passing of President Carter. When he left office, what he did post White House changed his legacy to some extent. Yeah. President George W. Bush, his legacy is probably better today than it was when he left office. So it can it can change, but I think, Tyler, you put it really well in terms of like Poilievre, assuming he's going to be prime minister, it looks that way, will have some impact there for sure. Okay, before we better get to it, 2025 agricultural predictions, thoughts. What are we watching? What do we think is going to happen? Lyndsey, where do you want to start?
Okay. Well, there's sort of the obvious, I think. We can talk about profitability. I think that is going to be the name of the game for 2025 is how do we stay there in the instances where we maybe aren't there? How do we minimize what those losses look like? Where are the places that we can pull back? We can perhaps add in for better ROI, et cetera. I think that is very much on the minds of many, whether you're crop producer, livestock producer, et cetera. It's a question. And that, of course, there's several things that play into that. So our Canadian dollar helps on some aspects and hurts on some others. So it sort of depends on which side of, if you're buying equipment or buying parts or if you're selling grain. So these things sort of all play in. So that's on sort of the production side. I think profitability will be one of the big ones. I think bigger picture, and as we've talked about here, protectionism and policy and trade, tariffs, et cetera, that is going to be the biggest story, I think. And maybe it's a good thing we will get a glimpse of that earlier than later in this calendar year, maybe.
Yeah. You look at a cropping perspective. I'm looking at a report from Terrain, written by John Newton, who we had on the show going back to, I think, late November, early December. U.S. numbers, okay, but just will you just Canada? I don't think would be that different. Across all major crops, projected loss on whether it's cotton, oats, sorghum, corn, peanuts, rice, soybeans, or wheat. Actually, if you look at cotton, which we don't have any acres in Canada, it's like $339 an acre loss. It's 38% below break even. Also, why cotton in that the market relief payments that the U.S. is going to get, it's like $80 an acre. Is why cotton was the highest when we look at that. But Tyler, not a very rosy picture from a financial perspective in row crops, Canada or the U.S.
No, and I think when I think about 2025, I worry that 2025 is the year that our luck runs out in Canadian agriculture. I mean, I think if you look at the last decade, it's been a pretty good decade. I mean, profitability's been good. Kind of we've kind of surfed this wave in a really positive way, but it seems like for a variety of different reasons that wave's about to come crashing down. And it seems like the good times that we've had, the ability to kind of rest on our laurels is going to go away this year. And I think if you think in kind of decades, the 2000s were a pretty tough year. The 2010s were pretty good sets of years, and we'll see now whether or not where the 2020s come on it. But whenever I was, so I worked for the Conservative government as a staffer. I think that there's this image that those were good years for Canadian agriculture. It was different than the years before it under the Chrétien Martin, where we saw quite a bit of farm protests and other issues. But that had very little to do with the fact that one government was better for Canadian agriculture than the other. It was the fundamentals were bad. The markets weren't in as good a shape under Chrétien Martin. The markets were pretty good under Harper. Things were on the upswing. Things have stayed pretty stable under Trudeau. And it'll be interesting to see, again, if the government changes this year, how does a Conservative government manage bad times in Canadian agriculture? Because we haven't had to really worry about that recently.
Yeah. I wanted to add, I think that, if we think specifically from, the Canadian agriculture perspective, one of the things that we will see this year is sort of the next discussion on the business risk management programs on sort of, we had last time around, we had the Guelph statement. We'll be looking for sort of, getting to sort of this next round of what agriculture policy framework looks like next time around. So that is on the docket for this year. And with a change in government, what what does that look like? What does that look like for programming? What does that look like for funding? There's definitely a question, I think. I don't think it's any secret that Poilievre wants a small government. He wants to cut, a lot of the spending that's been happening under Trudeau. And what will that look like for agriculture? I think that, we have to understand that there will be some. So what will that look like? Where is that going to happen? I think that's a big question for this year.
And I would hazard a guess, like I was referring to the market relief program that the U.S. is going to be implementing here within 90 days, $10 billion.
We won't get that.
Farmers for the market, the reduction in commodity prices. That is not happening in 2025 in Canada. I promise you.
And I think we're going to continue to see this difference in how farms react, right? This divide between the small farm and the large farm. I mean, you see this, Shaun, in a lot of the survey work that you do, right? The way that they manage the risk, the way they think about the challenges that are in front of them, how well positioned they are to deal with the downturn is very different. And we've seen this hollowing out of mid-sized farms, and I wonder if that gets kicked into kind of hyperdrive in 2025 as guys look to cash out on high land prices and get out if things get tough.
Well,
and high cattle prices, Tyler.
That's right.
Don't forget.
Well, I'm going to push the panel to find some positive things about 2025 when we come back. You're listening to RealAg Radio, Rural Radio 147, and you're listening to Shaun Haney, Lyndsey Smith, and Tyler McCann. We'll be back right after this. RealAg Radio is Canada's only daily radio show focused on agriculture. Get expert advice on Agronomic Monday. Tuesdays and Wednesdays will cover a broad range of issues. Thursday we'll hear from farmers across the country on the Farmer Rapid Fire. And we'll wrap things up Fridays with the RealAg Issues Panel with Kelvin Hepner and Lyndsey Smith. Join us Monday through Friday at 4:30 Eastern. And don't forget about the replay at 7 in the morning on Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM.
Hi, I'm Bernard Tobin, host of the Soybean School on RealAgriculture.com. Throughout the year, on the Soybean School, we'll bring you timely agronomic video content from planting to harvest, from the latest agronomic research to the latest in production technology. Check out our massive video library on YouTube, RealAgriculture.com, or download the audio podcast versions wherever you get your podcasts. The Soybean School is brought to you by BASF and Syngenta Canada.
And welcome back to RealAg Radio, Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM. It is great to be back. And we've got Tyler McCann of CAPI and Lyndsey Smith of Real Agriculture, and we're breaking down some of the big issues. We've talked about whether or not we'll have a prime minister. We've talked about some of our predictions for 2025. And I am trying to keep this positive, everybody, but the panel just wants to drag us into the negativity. So to finish off the show, positivity. Remember this. Lyndsey, what's something positive that's going to happen at 25?
Oh, well, from a livestock producer's perspective, corn's cheap. So that's good for me. Okay, so I will say, to try and keep it positive, there's a few things. One of them, I think, is as we continue to see technology advancements, I want to see smart use of AI. I think that we have some really cool opportunities to potentially be using AI in agriculture. I also think, and let's face it, when times are lean, it forces us to make better decisions, right? You have to watch your pennies. You have to keep a sharp pencil. And frankly, I think sometimes we can learn some really cool things about that. So I think that there's opportunities there for finding, doing a better job maybe at really keeping those profitable acres profitable, maybe making some different decisions on less profitable or unprofitable acres. Definitely some of that happening. And one of the other things I think that I think will be positive is, as we've seen, and I know that it maybe starts out negative, is we are, I think, seeing a shift towards more just reality entering the chat, right? So we've had a lot of funding and venture cap money into some of these ideas that isn't this better? Vertical farming and all these sorts of other things that maybe don't actually have the business model that's actually successful when people can't spend a lot of extra money on food, et cetera. And that maybe just a return to sort of the reality that farming is tough, but we can do a pretty good job without having to get too sort of out there and try and replace nature. We can do a pretty good job with nature as well. And I think that's, I don't think that's a bad thing.
I can remember some pundits saying that vertical farming is the future. We will no longer need all of this farmland because we're going to do it in factories in the city. Well, that's look how that's working out. You mentioned productivity through AI. The great story in the Wall Street Journal this week, looking at how productivity of the American worker is increasing. And the journal talks about how a big part of that is because of the use of technologies like AI, being able to just do more things in a day. Output per hour is increasing. The story says the total output of the economy divided by hours worked is what profitability or productivity is. It rose 2% in the third quarter compared with the year earlier. According to the Labor Department, that marked the fifth quarter in a row with an increase of 2% or better. In the 5 years before the pandemic, there were only 2 such quarters. So positivity from a productivity standpoint. Tyler, what are your thoughts?
So I think, going back to the livestock piece, I think that 2025 being a good year for the beef industry is a good for Canadian agriculture. I think that we need to have more success across the sector and across different value chains. And I think more livestock or more competition for more acres to against just crop production, I think is going to be a good thing. And I think it's nice to see that switch around. Again, hard for me not to think in the policy context. I think an election is a good thing for this country. And I don't say that as a partisan, but I think we're at the point where we desperately need one, and hitting that reset button is going to be a good thing. So I'm looking forward to that this year. And I really do think that there's this opportunity to take some of those negatives that we talked about earlier, realize that finally we can't just rest on our laurels, that the status quo isn't good enough, and commit to doing something about it. And so I'm pretty excited that there may be some short-term pain, but that could come for long-term gain as we start to better understand what are those opportunities that we really want to go all in on, and where can we really have a success, where can we really have an impact. And I think that, again, we need to be kind of shaken out of our complacency to do that, and hopefully 2025 will do that, but do it in a good way.
Yeah, some people will be saying the same things about Hockey Canada and our youth development program there, Tyler. You and your sport, like, for a guy that doesn't watch sports, you're just like bringing it all together.
Yeah, I got on skates twice over the holidays, Shaun, and so I guess it's having an impact.
Wow.
And you have no gashes on your head, so that's a positive.
Yeah.
We're talking about vertical farming. Okay, so there's a story out in Bloomberg, Plenty, which is the name of the company that was a high-profile valuation, like $1.9 billion. Eric Schmidt of Google. SoftBank was involved. Jeff Bezos, story out in Bloomberg, is in talks to raise another $125 million as part of the recapitalization. According to people familiar with the matter, the new deal would value the company's existing shares at less than $15 million. It was valued at $1.9 billion.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, I think it's important that as an industry, we recognize that, we want innovation. We want to solve problems. We want to make sure that there's enough food for people to eat and the food that they want. Like, that is a key part of agriculture. But sometimes I feel like in some of these things, we were trying or are trying to solve problems that maybe didn't exist. So this is where I think, when we start to see some of these companies really failing, maybe there's a reason why, and it's pretty clear why.
But I think that there's also this like 2025 could be the return to basics here, right? Like, let's get back to what actually matters. And vertical farming may work in some situations, but this idea that there's going to be unlimited venture capital money that's going to keep these businesses afloat is out the window. There's a lot of real good opportunity for sustainability, but we've probably spent too many years talking about too much market potential that doesn't face the reality of who's actually willing to pay and who's willing to pay more for it. And so I think that's going to be out the window, and it's going to be, again, sustainability for the sake of what actually works for farmers and what can have a positive impact for them. I think that reality check is going to be a good thing in 2025. And I do think a better understanding of where can public and private investments have the most impact, and forcing us to be a little bit more strategic around, okay, where do we actually want our money to go? It's not going to just all go into vertical farming. It's going to go into ag tech again. I think that there's the sense that ag tech may come out of a bit of a dip in 2025 heading into 2026. Like, I think all of those things are good, but it's part of a, going back to what's agriculture really about and what do we need to do in order to have a successful, profitable, prosperous industry.
Productivity. swinging back to focus on productivity.
But it's not just productivity, right? It's profitability, and those two things are not the same, right? It's not just about more all of the time. It's about what can we do to make our margins better and make our industry more profitable. And I think there's a strong argument to be said, especially in the food manufacturing business in Canada, where we're not well positioned to compete on scale. It's how do we boost the profitability? How do you do a better job kind of being really good at, niche, but big niche products? How do we lean into what we've got working for us? And it isn't just productivity, it's profitability. And I think sometimes, Shaun, we mix those two things together when we should. Profitability really is what matters. And profitability is not a bad thing. It's a good thing when farmers are profitable. It's a good thing when retailers are profitable. It's a good thing when food processors are profitable. And we need more of a focus on that.
We're going to be reminded how important trade is to our industry as well. Just to jump back to the potential of these Trump tariffs, like
I thought this was.
I know.
I thought this was the optimistic segment, Shaun. We're not.
Yeah. Come on.
No. You're going to take us backwards.
No, I'm not. I think it's a good thing. We need a little bit of a shot across the bow potentially to remind us how bloody important trade is to our industry. Because I think from a trade advocacy perspective, we've become complacent. We have not seen the federal government have enough of a focus on it. I think the farming community has not looked at trade as this great thing and positive. I see a difference between how Canadians talk about trade versus how our friends to the south do in the level of importance that it has. So some adversity in the trade front might actually help us. And you take it to the election as well. Okay. How farmers react to trade disputes under a Poilievre government is going to be different than how they react under a Trudeau government. Because under a Trudeau government, it's always like, oh, Trudeau doing his thing and he's trying to screw us. He's trying to kill farming. Well, they're not going to have that reaction under Pierre. So what's the reaction going to be? I think that's going to be fascinating in 25.
And I think it gets into the question around where can we have the most impact, right? We have spent a decade really focused on the Indo-Pacific, right? This great diversification approach. And we are more concentrated in the U.S. market today than we were 10 years ago. Right? Then I think we need to understand, we need to go back to this reality that it's one thing to have all of these great ideas, all of these great talking points, all of these great strategies, but reality matters. And the reality is that our trade agenda has been increasingly focused on the United States. That means that those Trump tariffs are going to hurt even more than they would have a decade ago. And it means we need a different approach to think about how do we do things differently. And we can't just say we're going to export it all, because talk to any business trying to move product through Vancouver and ask them how well that's going these days.
Yeah. Well, it's got a potential port strike in the U.S. on the East Coast coming up here very shortly here at the end of the month. Hey, we're out of time here on Rural Radio, but here's the best part of it. We're going to have an exclusive podcast version. We still got more stuff to talk about. The panel's going to stick around. We're going to do an extra segment on the podcast version. So if you do not get the podcast, make sure you get it wherever you get your podcasts and just search RealAg Radio. Lyndsey, all the best to you.
Cheers, everybody.
Signing off, Tyler, here on Rural Radio.
Thanks, Shaun.
If you have any feedback, send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. Thanks so much, everybody, for getting real and getting connected with RealAg Radio. Well, that was a ton of fun. We've done the show now on Rural Radio 147. Now we take the podcast version to another level. We're going to the moon, Alice! And Lyndsey Smith, Tyler McCann, and the stuff we didn't get to. And so we'll continue the conversation. I wanted to... Tyler mentioned at the end of the show... Great job today, everybody. But Tyler mentioned at the end of the show about how we've actually, over time, become more reliant on trade with the U.S. And so if you're watching on YouTube, you will see a graph I'm going to put on the screen here that really encompasses this. This shows U.S.-Canada agricultural trade, how it's expanded with few interruptions during the lifetime of free trade between the two countries. Now, for everybody listening to the audio version, basically since 2020, we've gone vertical. We've gone hockey stick, so to speak, on both imports and exports. And so, Tyler, I think this exactly supports the point that you're making at the end of the show. We're actually, as much as we talk about trade diversification, we're actually becoming more reliant on trade with the U.S.
Well, and it's not just that, Shaun, and as much as I can kind of be a negative Nelly sometimes, one of the good news stories is that our food manufacturing business has seen some pretty good growth over the last 5 years. And so my hunch is that chart actually doesn't include manufactured food, which drives our food surplus, our trade surplus even higher. And these are jobs and plants that are at risk and that would move south. And they talk about the U.S. fascination with a trade surplus. It's one thing to kind of slough it off when we're talking about fertilizer, where the fertilizers, it's in their interest to do it. But we're a major exporter of baked goods, of bakery goods from Canada to the United States. That's the type of trade surplus that the U.S. does want to get rid of, and that we do need to be thinking about what do we need to do to keep those bakery jobs in Canada, keep those plants operating, and how do we lean into this and do more? And there's some interesting things around sugar and chocolate. Canada is a major chocolate exporter because of the U.S. sugar policy that prevents growth and export in the U.S. We've taken advantage of that. Canada is a major player in the chocolate business. So how do we do more of that? How do we think about what more we could do, and how do we really lean into it, recognizing that this is a huge liability in the meantime, because it is exactly what the U.S. is concerned about.
Yeah.
I thought this was all butter tarts, but apparently it's not.
Well, so
anyway,
I haven't read the book yet, but I was on the media trip I did to the Nutrien potash mine. There was a gentleman out of the U.S. there that used to be, think about this gig. He was like a candy writer. So yes. So he had tons of insights into like candy and chocolate and all this kind of stuff and the secrets, like all that kind of stuff. It was fun. The book he recommended is called The Emperors of Chocolate: Inside the Secret World of Hershey and Mars. So it's a fantastic book. So there's a book recommendation. I have not got to it yet. I will get to it in 2025, but there's an opportunity really for everybody. I referenced John Newton earlier in the show from Terrain, great ag economist. And Lyndsey, one of the things he talks about with this trade deficit the U.S. is so focused on from an agriculture perspective, all they have to do is stop eating avocados, drinking wine, and consuming.
Tequila.
Yeah, yes.
Yeah,
like
tequila. Yeah.
And
that's
stop
just it.
eating
The US
fruits and
could just solve
vegetables.
it. Yeah, they could solve it. They just have to change their behavior. Isn't that the easiest thing, to just change behavior? Yeah, no. So, it does bring in that, and maybe in Canada we're perhaps a little more familiar with this in that we do think about, those numbers of those particular things that are, the highest value or that they come from Canada. And when we've had trade disputes, we start to think about these things. But realistically, I think that, and unfortunately, it's not going to be a key part of this administration, is that, that nuance of these are things we want that we can't potentially grow here or make here, right? If you want a certain tequila that comes from Mexico, it comes from Mexico. There's not really any other way about it. Where do the avocados grow? Where does potash come from? But will we see potentially some special treatment of certain things? To go back to the beginning of this whole conversation, we shouldn't expect it. And that, I think, regardless of what it is, whether it's our baked goods, whether it's carb parts, or whether it's potash, while we may ask for it and we may campaign for it, and our premiers and our prime minister and our trade people may try to carve out some of these things for, frankly, our canola, I don't think we can expect it. And that's the key here, I think, is that it's not expected that we'll get any sort of special treatment on these.
Because I didn't want the whole show to be negative, we were talking about positivity at the end, and we were making fun of that. But
I tried.
a question I was going to ask, and there's some data here, and it has to do with: are we in an ag recession? Okay, so this is from the Ag Economist Monthly Monitor that Farm Journal does. This is again U.S. Ag Economist, but I think we can extrapolate to Canada. 56% of ag economists responded by saying agriculture is currently in a recession, which is up from 53% who responded that way in October. So this is a November number. Now, that's 56%. 81% of economists surveyed said the U.S. ag economy is on the brink of a recession, which is a significant jump from the 56% of economists who responded that way in the October survey. That gets your attention. 81% of ag economists in the U.S. saying we are on the brink. Tyler, where would you swing? Would you say we're in or on the brink?
I would say probably in the Canadian context, either we're in or we're very close to being in. But I think it's important to remember that, again, that means different things to different people. And again, I think we talked about this a bit earlier, but how that recession or those conditions would impact farms really are going to be pretty different around what business you're in, what position your farm is in. And I think that we need to understand that more and kind of think better about what are the different risk management tools that people would need or strategies that they should be using to deal with it. But again, it's like it's hard to know what that looks like. And if you talk about inflation, I think economists in the Bank of Canada got really hot to trot, raised some interest rates up when I think if there's a pretty strong argument to make that the inflation that we dealt with before was because of like transactional issues or things that kind of work themselves out. This recession that we're in now, like I think the more interesting piece is what's driving us into it and what can we actually influence and change and how do we get ourselves out of it?
I was surprised that neither of you, and I didn't either, but when we talked about the positives for 2025, none of us mentioned axe the tax and the carbon tax going away. Why didn't we mention that?
What difference is it gonna make?
Well, grain drying,
also,
from if I'm drying corn, I'm definitely going to, or heating a barn, I'm definitely going to see a difference.
Yeah, so I think
profitability.
Yeah, so I think from that perspective, well, first of all, I guess on one hand, it's when would that actually happen? So first, we need to change the government first. So, and as we laid out, that is likely, very likely. When is still a question. So we're still a couple months away from that. And realistically, yes, it will have an impact, obviously, on those line items where, we pay that fee on grain drying, et cetera, on propane, on all those sorts of things. It will have an impact for sure. I thought you were going to say that we didn't actually bring up, inflation stalling or even deflation. And that's because Kelvin wasn't here. So my apologies, Kelvin. I promised I would bring up inflation, but didn't. Go ahead, Tyler.
But I was going to say, so I was a bit flippant when I said what impact will it have, but I think that we've overplayed the role of the carbon tax and its impact on food prices or competitiveness. Clearly, for farmers that are using natural gas, propane, whatever it is, they're dealing with those costs. Again, I think what the carbon tax has done is made Canadian farmers poorer. I think it's maybe not made us as poorer as we think it is, but clearly that is a cost. That is I think that the big impact is that it has taken money out of farmers' pockets. So it will not do that anymore, and that's going to be clearly a good thing. And it has. I don't think that there's any evidence that it's reduced emissions from Canadian agriculture. I don't think it's done that. So I don't think it has any impact on the climate whatsoever. But it's not going to make food cheaper. It's not going to have any structural impact on the competitiveness of the Canadian agriculture, but it will leave more money in farmers' pockets. And in a tough year, like it looks like 25 is going to be, that's a good thing.
Yeah. But when we were talking earlier about resting on our laurels and stuff like that, and maybe being a little bit, having some naivety in terms of how Canada is viewed or just how countries respond to us and some of our assumptions, do you think that we're being a little bit naive when it comes to some of the potential of these Trump tariffs and the movement of Canadian capital? And I think about the manufacturing sector, right? Where I've got a plant in Saskatoon, I've got a plant in Indiana. And if I'm facing a 25% tariff on a finished good coming out of my Saskatoon plant, and I don't face that on my Indiana plant, and the largest market I'm trying to move product to is where the Indiana plant is, am I not shutting down my Saskatoon plant? Like, we're not talking about this enough, are we?
No, we're not. And Shaun, if I was more prepared, I could have showed my own graph. If you look back at the year 2000, just over 60% of agri-food GDP came from food and bev manufacturing, and primary agriculture was under 40%. Today, both of those numbers are a lot closer to 50. We are more reliant on primary agriculture than we used to be. And I know often when we think about agriculture, we think about farmers, but we don't do enough thinking about food manufacturing and the benefits of that value-added sector in this country. And again, I think this is a really good example where, again, I don't think that we realize how close some of those plants are going to be to moving south of the border. And we are in a space where we need investment. We need pork slaughter in this country. We need to look at what that growth looks like. We need more processing in Ontario and Quebec and across Western Canada. And we're not seeing it.
Yeah, I do think actually this will be, from an agriculture perspective, this will be one of Poilievre's toughest nuts to crack here, is that he can't change. If Trump puts that tariff on and doesn't budge on it, and maybe there's a carve out for oil and gas, whatever, but Poilievre states very clearly that those are the kind of jobs, very similar, right? This is the kind of thing that Poilievre wants for Canada, is productivity and jobs staying here and value add and all that. And that's great. That's wonderful. Realistically, though, our hands may be tied on this one. And what does that look like? Like, I think it's going to be the toughest one to answer because there are things outside of potentially Poilievre's control. So what is that going to look like? It's going to take some serious, some really good ideas. Not saying we can't do it, but it's going to take some seriously good ideas.
But there's this tension between food processing and manufacturing and primary agriculture. I think we fall into this trap on the issues panel, right? We tend to always talk about what does this mean for primary agriculture, and we forget about what this means for the agri-food part of agriculture and agri-food.
Right.
I think that there's this really interesting discussion amongst the food processors in this country saying we'd be better off if we weren't the responsibility of Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada. We don't want the agriculture minister to be the food processing minister. We want the industry minister to be the food processing minister. I think that's speaks to some of the challenges that exist inside the ministry that bears responsibility for agri-food today. But that's not good. Like, we need food manufacturers that feel the support of the entire agriculture and agri-food sector in this country. We need them to be strong.
Okay, I know we're running out of time, but Tyler, from your perspective, what are some of the key reasons that, say, an agri-food manufacturer wants to be industry not? Is it the labor component? Is it the tech component? Where does it fall apart on the policy side? Because
so I think that there's some real basic things around understanding the dynamics in the sector. Right? I think that there's the sense that the agriculture department just doesn't understand food manufacturing. There's this real tension that exists where, for a lot of people, when they talk to Industry Canada also doesn't get it. They don't see agriculture, agri-food processing as innovative enough, but Agriculture Canada can't seem to figure out how to support it. If you look at where the agriculture minister has put his or her attention recently, if you look at where Agriculture Canada is putting its resources, it's all going to primary agriculture. So I think that they just genuinely feel left out. If you look at regulatory reform issues, they don't get any support from the department on it. If you look at agriculture workforce and labor issues, that tends to be focused on, again, primary agriculture without a real good understanding about the different dimensions that food processors face. But I think it's a lot of different issues, but comes to a fundamental view that agri-food processing is different, and the agriculture department just doesn't get it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and I'm not saying this is going to happen, but I'll give you an extreme example of all of a sudden the two major beef packing plants in Alberta decide, you know what, 25% tariff, can't afford it.
Yep.
And I'm not saying that's happening, but I just trying to hyperbolically get your attention. But if you were upset about the carbon tax being a line item on, from a cost perspective, just wait till the grain company or the beef packer puts a deduction on your check because the product's going to go to the U.S. and you're going to bear the cost of the tariff. That you think the carbon tax is expensive? Wait till that happens.
But it's not just what happens if one of those big beef plants that goes, right? What is actually happening is a whole bunch of small plants. The small and medium-sized food processors are ceasing to exist in this country. We're at a risk of some larger food processing plants that aren't going to have that same kind of seismic impact as if we lost the plant at High River or at Brooks, but that continue to erode the competitiveness, the profitability of the food sector in Canada. And so it would be nice if we realized that these little tremors that are happening ultimately still have that same impact as that real seismic event of a plant. It just takes longer for us to feel the impacts of it.
Yeah. Well, we got to wrap up. As much as we could just keep on going, and I would love to do so. We got other stuff to do here today. So, hey, I really appreciate everybody, Lyndsey and Tyler, hanging in here for this bonus exclusive episode at the end here for the RealAg Radio podcast. Really do appreciate it. Have yourselves a great weekend, both of you.
You
Great.
as well.
Have a great weekend. Happy New Year.
Okay, again, everybody, if you have feedback, we want to hear from you. Send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. And you can call the RealAg feedback line, 855-776-6147. Ooh, rusty, Lyndsey. Also, I'm going to be in Kennewick, Washington on Tuesday, speaking at the Crop Systems Conference. All the direct seeders and no-tillers in the PNW. There's a group I like. We're going to be speaking about, we'll be definitely talking about what's going on with this House Speaker election, which it looks like Mr. Johnson's going to lose on the first ballot. So we'll definitely have an update on that when I speak at that conference on Tuesday. Thanks, everybody, for getting real and getting connected with RealAg Radio. Cheers, everybody.